look, I'd like to welcome whoever is online, and I'm sure Danny will be asking some questions, and we'll be learning a lot more about each of you. But I'd like to obviously welcome everyone to the webinar. This is going to be a really great topic. Undoubtedly, I've heard Danny speaking.
Oh, hi, can you hear me? Oh, yeah. You're stuck. My internet seems to be stuck. Hello?
Companies are difficulties.
I can hear you.
They're a period of, change and asking employees to, change their hours, their days. There's a little bit of uncertainty. Companies are really trying to make sure that, well, hopefully most companies are trying to make sure that, that their employees and their workforce is in force, because, when we all get through COVID, without a workforce, you really don't have much of a business. So everyone's really important, and I'm sure that Danny will be talking a lot about potentially job seeker. I don't know if you're going to be covering that, but I would imagine that some people are going to definitely have questions around that. But Danny will also be talking around what we can expect of the workforce. And when we talk about the future, I think that that's a mistake. It's not the future, it's what workforce we have now and how it's going to continue to really build upon what's going on now. So, this is going to be a really great and informative seminar, and I'm going to turn it over to Danny. And
All right.
Let me just make Danny a host so I can then skedaddle out of here.
I don't know if I'm...
Believe it, I can't find how to do it. See, there you go.
I don't know if I'm even still on mute, to be honest. Can you hear me, Sarah?
No, I can hear you, Danny. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hello, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today and to talk about what's going on in employment law land, especially around changes that we've seen with a shift to different ways of working, and how social media in particular is working to engage staff and workplaces in general on a different basis. So before we get started, I can see a couple of familiar names in the attendee list. So big shout outs there to Catherine and Leslie. Nice to see you there. I'd like to hear, and perhaps you can just pop it in the chat, if we've got any employers on this webinar, or if we are more an employee-based market. So if you can all just pop in a little response in the chat, that'd be really helpful for me to know what kinds of things that we're going to have much more interest in today. So I see that absolutely no one has, an employee, thank you very much. And an employer, that's great. So I will take the two people that have responded as indicative of the audience, and I'll make it balanced. All right, let's get started. So today we're going to be looking at some key outcomes here of understanding what it is that an employer can do to control social media used by their employees within the course of business. And we're going to put on our positivity pants, and we're going to look at opportunities to adopt a growth mindset, find the CRISISTUNITY. Be talking to you about that in a minute, because the changes that are happening are actually opening our eyes to a lot of things. And finally, I'm going to help you see the pitfalls. Where are the sharp edges that are going to draw blood if we don't actually address them now? So CRISISTUNITY, this is a phrase I love so much. I use it so much actually that my wife has banned me saying it in the house. She's sick of hearing it. And I stole it from Ricky Gervais's character off The Office, where I heard him use it once and I thought, that's mine. I'm going to adopt that. And I think that in most situations of crisis, if you look for the silver linings and you try to find the learnings out of it, then you're going to have a much better experience with whatever trauma that is going in, and looking for those awesome learnings that we can bounce out of the trauma is really where we're going to find growth, because falling, everybody falls. It's how you get up that counts. So I see a lot of senior executive clients, and some of you on this list will know exactly what I mean by saying this. Sometimes you're going through some really tough times at work and you think, you know what, I'm better off out of there. Let's leverage this situation and get a good payout. For an employer, you might think, you know what, it's time to get rid of some dead wood around here, refocus in on what it is that we want to do as our core business and adapt to the new normal. So I think that social media in particular is something that is changing because of the COVID crisis, and there are some awesome opportunities that are coming out of it. Let's talk a little bit about context. So we're all in it together, and I know that everybody knows that right now it's a pretty scary time. You know, the stats that my brilliant paralegal was able to pull together for me, I said, what are the stats on people working from home? She said, I don't know, but here's some stats about people catching a train. So you can see that there's been an absolute nosedive of people traveling into town, and it's at depression level, 1920s level of commuting. So interestingly, in Sydney, where I'm based, we've just turbocharged our public transport system and increased capacity, and no one's using it. So this, along with the jobless data and also the public health directive, is all combining to show us that more people than ever are working flexibly, and employers are relying on their employees to work in a remote kind of way. So that's the context. But how are employers actually using social media? It's not just the employees who are friends with each other on Facebook or trying to promote their career on LinkedIn. It is also employers who are adapting to new ways of working. And here are just a couple of examples of things that employers use. So within my business, we use both Teams and WhatsApp. WhatsApp's the social fun chat where we post cat pit videos, and Teams is where we do our immediate group chats or individual chats. We have lots of video calls because I like to see people's faces. We're also using Zoom, and everybody uses LinkedIn to some extent in my office. We did try Workplace, but we ended up going with Teams because we're a Microsoft-based office, but Workplace is pretty cool for different things. I'd be really interested to hear from the people who are attending what kind of products are being used within your own organisation. So if anybody is keen to just drop in a little note to me, either as in the question or answer or in the webinar chat, I'd be really keen to see what other people are using. So one of the things that I noticed when we were using Workplace as a particular example was that it's based on the Facebook platform. And so we got to have some awkward questions around, do we have to all be friends on Facebook in order to use this? And, is it that if you can see that I have a profile on Facebook and you have a profile on Facebook, is it awkward that we're not also connecting? So it's interesting that as we have, I can see that one of the attendees at least is using Workplace. As we are adapting to using these traditionally social platforms for more professional uses, these kinds of questions are coming out where we've got, is it appropriate for a boss to seek to be friends with someone else? So And thanks, Arang. I can see that it's your view that it's separate to Facebook and there's no expectation to be friends on Facebook. I had a different experience. I was seeing some of my younger people look at me and say, oh, you've got a profile, and or, you know, you're familiar with Facebook. Yeah, I'm familiar with Facebook, and linking it through that way. So it's little things. So moving on now to looking at the levels of control that an employer will have. What kinds of things can an employer do? Well, we're all bound by this notion of what is a reasonably lawful direction. What is reasonable and what is lawful? And in different contexts, there will be a different answer to what is both reasonable and lawful. For instance, if you've got a group of lawyers, the directions that you make to them that is going to be reasonable and lawful would be very different to a group of cleaners. If I was to tell one of my lawyers to go and clean the toilets, I would have a lawsuit on my hands. It's a thing. However, the cleaners, you know, that's part of their job. So with the use of social media, we're starting to look at what is reasonable and lawful in different kinds of contexts, what is at work and what is outside of work. Also, we've got the conundrum of device provision. If you've got a phone that's provided to you by work, what kind of supervision is the employer able to have on that device? Is the employer able to block access to social media on that device? A decade ago, it was the done thing, or probably not even that long ago, the done thing to block things like Facebook or YouTube on work-provided devices. And these days, I'm not seeing anywhere near as much that kind of blocking. So we're having a bit of a shift in the employer base on the kinds of controls that they're going to use to regulate employee time. So we've also got this question, and I've touched on it briefly, about is it important to look at the connections that your employees have with each other? And is it appropriate to get in there and engage in a discussion about who is or is not a friend of a particular employee? And this is a question that I've actually had come up a couple of times in practice, both when I act for employers and employees, about people feeling left out from social cliques within the office. They can have a group chat that excludes one person. And so we've got these different kinds of challenges now, especially where we've got a remote workforce, where the kinds of interaction people are having is so secret and so far removed from what the employer does on a daily basis that you can't see who's being excluded. So is it appropriate now to have a policy that says if you're friends with one, you're friends with all? Or please consider when interacting with your peers on social media that people might feel left out. Is it worthwhile holding some training to help people to recognise that harm can be caused simply by thoughtlessness? Some people might read into their exclusion from certain things where it's just a mistake and they should be included on that. And I think that the COVID-19 circumstance has absolutely shifted the thinking around, well, it wasn't reasonable before because we had face-to-face interactions, but now our standard conversations are being hosted on a platform where we can't actually physically attend. It is something that's worthwhile considering in some contexts. We've also got an issue of privacy. Now, there is a wealth of information sitting on any device that is owned by your employer or by an employer, and a couple of grand can reap amazing results with a forensic IT professional. When I'm acting for employers and we're concerned about what an employee might have been up to in the final days or weeks of their employment, we will often get a report that shows page impressions as well as the variety of server-based interactions that you would traditionally expect to have exposed to your employer. We all expect that our sent items, as an example, hosted on an employer-based server, are going to be discoverable. But what about our WhatsApp? Supposed to be encrypted. Well, there are page impressions that can be obtained by a forensic examination, unless we go and completely wipe back to factory settings, which in and of itself is a dubious step to take. It's not strictly legal. So the use of an employer's device for private interactions is a really blurred line these days. So it's my recommendation of, if you're an employee, to run 2 phones. Have the one that your employer gives you and have your own for private use, and start to get some discipline in separating out what's work and what's private. And the same goes for laptops or tablets. If work is giving you a Microsoft Surface, which is what we do, and you are wanting to engage in, lots of personal internet-based gaming or whatever, some of those games are pretty raunchy. And if it is that later I was going to, if any of my staff are on here, please don't think that I'm being as paranoid, but if later I was looking for an excuse to find some dodgy conduct to justify dismissal because I've decided it's time that you move on, then finding some page impressions of some pretty raunchy video games on my machine in breach of the policies that we have here is going to be an interesting discussion to have. So the device that's provided by your employer is certainly not private. Further on from that, as humans, we all want to connect, and most of us on this call will have at least one social media account on one of the platforms, probably multiple. And the question is asked sometimes, do I need to set up a new work-based persona? And something that I find really interesting is the challenge of ownership over a profile on LinkedIn in particular. In recruitment and real estate, I have seen employers build into their contracts a requirement for the access of LinkedIn to be assigned to the employer, and the employee is to update it, but then at the end of employment, they are to delete and completely destroy all lists arising from that profile. So for a recruiter, where it is your contact and your profile, and that's how you are able to get people to put bums in seats, that can be a real disincentive for resigning and moving on. So these are the kinds of questions in some industries that people are negotiating very hard on and being burnt at the end of a relationship, having failed to see in the small print, in the fine print, that there were these issues. Finally, looking at the boundaries that we're going to set for each other on how to engage when we're using these platforms. I personally have been caught out on this where I thought that it was a phone call and it turned out it was a Zoom, and I hadn't done my hair yet and I looked like a porcupine and the client's looking at me. I'm thinking, oh, just a second. I'm running to the bathroom, putting some water in my hair. So the person that is conducting a meeting, you are still presenting on behalf of your employer, and it's important that you are presenting the kind of image that a client is going to be expecting. And it's also important for your colleagues to see that you're taking it seriously. I think all of my staff have been working in hoodies and flannelette for the last month and a half. And look, I'm totally okay with that. because clients can't see that. And it's the traditional view I've got of a newsreader where you've got a nice shirt on top and some aquanuis on the bottom. But your little screen and the image that people have of you is a really powerful impact. So I think it is important for employers to reflect on the kind of ground rules they want to set for their staff. Talking over people is just painful. I like to have the mute button so I can stop that from happening. And I tend to find that's a little bit gendered. So it's good to have the power over that. And also thinking about how you come across just by your facial expression. One of my lawyers, lovely guy. He has the worst resting bitch face. He looks like he's about to attack whoever's speaking, and that's just his normal face at rest. So I have to encourage him to think happy thoughts and try and put a smile on his face so that people don't think that he's angry at them, especially when they're talking and he's listening as part of that interaction on a Zoom call. It looks like he's discouraging the person from giving him information. So there are a range of things to think about that. So this is my most cherished part of the deck. And I'm excited to talk to you about some of the opportunities, finding the CRISISTUNITYs in what it is that we've got for people to think about. How are we going to leverage this? Well, I think that there is a real deepening of relationships that can happen with an effective use of social media. Here we've got, especially if we're working remotely, we've got people who are perhaps living alone or with only one other person or a cat, and they're getting really lonely. And so we've got this opportunity with a technology-enabled solution here where we can actually see people's faces. And I've made it a point to check in with each of my staff at least once a week just to see their face and say hi, not ask them about work, just see how they're going. Because that human-to-human interaction where you can go and stand by the proverbial water cooler has a lot of emotional benefit. So social media allows us to do that and can also make it fun and interactive. And also, just like we use Teams for professional and WhatsApp for party, there are different kinds of information that can be shared. We've got a bit of a meme competition happening about who's got the best meme that we can make in the office. So you can engage with people in a way that's non-traditional and fun and remind them that they're part of a community and not just a widget producing outcomes. There are some games that you can play that are platform-based where everybody can jump in and do little bits and pieces. And we play video games in the office sometimes, so it's really nice to be able to kind of broaden that experience by using these platforms for people who are at home and bored. Another CRISISTUNITY, and I think that this is bloody brilliant, is the fact that we are seeing that it is actually possible to work from home for so many years, especially for women who are seeking to return to the workforce more flexibly after child responsibilities. There has been a big fat no. And I come from a traditional big law firm environment, and working from home was not something that people did. You just, if you did do it, you were looked upon as taking a holiday and frankly taking the piss. Whereas now everybody's forced to work from home, and people are still getting work done, and they're still getting very high quality work done. We're able to collaborate. We've got this brilliant technology platform that, in a variety of different ways is able to help us to still produce excellent work. So the fact of working from home for some people has been in an awakening of their spirit. They've just felt like they're living their best life, and they don't really want to go back to traditional working models. And I think it's going to be much more difficult for employers moving forward to say no to that. And that is bringing me on to the final 2 points of this CRISISTUNITY. Whilst it's a sad fact of our current community and the standards and expectations that are placed on genders here, and I don't want to get too far into gender theory, but women are shouldering the majority of the domestic workload still, and the responsibility for children, and that has caused a stalling in careers following the first kind of year off, and also then the need to make sure that the kids get to school, get home from school and don't die, which is a surprisingly huge amount of work to make all happen. I've got 2 of them myself and it's bloody effort. So the ability to provide more flexible work models is actually going to really help with gender diversity in workplaces and helping for careers not to stall, but just to adapt to changes in life circumstances. And that's not just for women. People with disabilities who have found it traditionally very difficult to get on public transport or get into a place of work, if all of the able-bodied people are able to work from home, then we're starting to hire people in a purely remote environment. The kinds of impediments that would be blatant to an employer in a hiring process, despite this being unlawful, oh, that person's in a wheelchair, or oh, that person's agoraphobic and they don't want to leave the house. Well, all of these barriers go away when you're having a Zoom interview with someone and they're going to be working purely from home. So I think as a community, we're going to be able to achieve so much more on an equality basis if we are to see this as the opportunity that it is to open up our workplaces leveraging social media. And what can we take away from this right now? So while we're in the middle of it, we're in the trenches, it's a really good time to look at what we've already got. What policies have we got? Are they working now that we're really putting them to the test? Should we consult with our people and work out where the gaps are? There's no better time to sit down and really think about whether you need to update your policies, think about training, and set the bar for your team on how they're going to interact with each other. And for the employees on the line, think meaningfully about what kind of contribution you can make to this discussion and get it started. You're going to look like a bloody hero by saying, hey, I've reflected on our social media policies and I'm thinking that we could use some updates in this area. There are so many opportunities to do things better. And the policies are written usually in a bit of a vacuum of experience. Usually it's an HR person or a lawyer who's thinking, oh, what will be ideal? You know, in these circumstances, we just don't want people to say bad things about us publicly. And you might do a bit of a Google search and then Frankenstein together a policy from 17 different sources. That's fine. That's a great way to do drafting. Most legal drafting borrows from each other as well, so it's fine. But is it fit for purpose? The use of social media even 2 years ago is very different to the use of it today. So sit down and think about it. And then also, why not open your mind to looking at better ways of doing things? There are so many products on the market for collaboration, project management, and client interaction, those sorts of things. So it might be that there's a perfect solution sitting out there for your business, or something that's going to make for the employees on the call something that you've got to do in your job so much better, faster, easier. Then have a look at what's available, because there's some really great stuff out there. Join some chat groups, kind of work out where to get that information and start optimizing things, because now's the time to try and do it. I think it's really awesome. All right. Let's look at the sharp edges. Where are the risks? Firstly, it's access to the platform itself. I think about my business, and we've got a full spectrum of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds at different stages of their lives, with different access to things like a machine at home, enough data on their phone plan, internet wherever they're going to be working from, and even a space to work from. If you're living in a studio and there is nowhere, or a bedsit or wherever, and there's nowhere physically to work, or at least work comfortably and ergonomically, then it's worthwhile sitting down with that person and consulting with them about how you can make their experience better. Be prepared to spend some cash. You might need to ensure that you give that person a better phone plan and you pay for the top up. You give that person a device if they don't have their own. And it's usually reasonable, especially if the person's going to be using their home internet service provider to do work, for the employer to reimburse the employee for that month's worth of internet. Secondly, ambushing people with a video call when they're expecting a voice call, or just casually surprising them with a video call, can be really alarming and can put people off. Or you can catch people like me with porcupine hair and think, oh, that's really awkward. So I think it's polite to schedule these sorts of face-to-face interactions, just so that people can brush their hair and get ready, and also not feel ambushed, like you're checking up on them, because there's a trust issue there. Another risk, and I've actually seen this play out more than once, and it's a real shame. When you're doing a Zoom call, provided the person hasn't put a virtual background on, you can actually see into that person's world. I set up my own little home bolt hole in the little space off the side of my kitchen, because I had homeschooling going on in bedrooms and things. It was the quietest place in the house. But you could see that I was sitting in a kitchen. And so, you know, that was a little private slice of information that you can see through the Zoom. In other contexts, I've had Zooms with people, and I've heard about comments made on different calls where people have been quite rude and mean about a person's living situation and said, oh, can't you afford better accommodation? Or, oh, your place looks pretty bad. Haven't you cleaned up? It's already going to be embarrassing for that person, and making comments about their socioeconomic status, or their marital status, or if you're looking and you think, oh, you know, you've got a freedom flag in the background and I'm going to start making comments about your sexual orientation. It's not appropriate in the workplace. That person is in a workplace, and so it is not appropriate over social media either. And finally, sticking to boundaries. Social media is great, except we're on it all the time. And if we're interacting with social media on a work basis as well as a private basis, especially with WhatsApp, where I've got, you know, family group chats and work group chats, it's possible for the person to think, oh, well, I'll just engage in this kind of work. I'll just get a couple of things done. Or start to feel like, oh, I did lots of work last night, so I'll just dabble in the personal stuff, and I'll spend some time catching up with friends during work time, and I'll do the work time later. For professional staff, not so much of a big deal. Apart from a safety issue where, you know, you've got to have R&R time, it's not so much of a big deal. But for the people who are covered by an industrial instrument, an enterprise agreement, or a modern award, an employer has to pay the minimum rate of their entitlement for every single hour worked. And there are some very specific requirements around the minimum time for which you'll make that payment, minimum calls, which is sometimes up to 4 hours. So for someone to send an email that you've asked them to do via social media, when you actually could have waited till tomorrow, you're asking the person to do it at 9 o'clock at night, that can be a several $100 cost to the business not even thinking about the penalties that the employer is exposed to for breach of the award. So you've just got to be really careful about the way in which your staff are interacting with the social media and each other in a work context to make sure that you're not going to have an extreme exposure to back payment of wages. There are some things you can do about that. Careful contracting, checking in with staff to make sure that they understand where the boundaries are, and then monitoring their access. With the changes to modern awards that are now actually binding from the 1st of this month, an employer must keep time and wage records for the start and finish times of not only the shift, but the breaks that are taken along the way, so that an accurate calculation can be done, even where that person is getting paid a salary, and especially where that person's being paid a salary. So that the George Columbaris issue of having an annualised salary slowly be eroded in value by increases in industrial entitlements as well as scope of work isn't the kind of thing that's allowed to happen anymore. Not that it was allowed to happen then, but now the penalties are enormous. Also, and we've touched on this before, got to be careful about having a range of communications that are happening outside of your notice between employees that are going to be damaging to one or more of your people. Bullying is insidious and it's so hard to see as a third party if you're not involved directly in those conversations. And so the kinds of things that are going to be most effective in trying to address this risk is training, helping people identify where communications are crossing a line and empowering them to say no and report it, and then having a robust follow-up process. Just like a person can be bullied in the pub when they're off the clock and they're having a conversation with a colleague that's got nothing to do with work, and that's still something that the employer has been found in the past to be vicariously liable for, so too can bullying that is conducted over social media between private people on their private personal accounts that the employer has absolutely no knowledge of, the duty still exists. So you must take care to make sure that you're addressing that risk. Finally, when we're looking at a fully remote workforce and we're trying to have tough conversations, performance improvement discussions, conduct warnings, it's really hard to do it over social media. But if you've got to do it, then it's a lot better than doing it over email or over phone. And so you've got to just bring a certain level of solemnity to your conversation, and also think about the fact that you owe a duty of care to the person that's receiving your quite pointed feedback, and think about things like offering a employee assistance program, pay for counselling, or ask them, hey, are you feeling safe and ready to have a difficult conversation? Because it's time for me to give you the gift of feedback. If you don't do it in a compassionate way, the case law around unfair dismissal says that it can be either harsh, unjust, or unreasonable. And so the employer can be exposed to unfair dismissal proceedings, especially in the delivery of formal warnings, but also interventions. So I think that there will be a shift in the case law given the circumstances we're all in, where we don't really have a choice, and it's a lot better than a phone call or an email, but just do what you can to make it feel quite solid and weighty. Now, we've touched briefly on the difference between a social interaction and a professional interaction. And I don't know about everybody else on the line, but I've got so many apps on my phone and on my computer. I'm engaged in so many different conversations everywhere that I'm losing track. And I'm sure my employees, you know, they've all got different things going on in their life. Some are more tech savvy than others. They've got their own things going on in there too. And so the ability to control what's going on in every conversation is simply not there. And we shouldn't try for that level of control. It really comes down to an employer being very clear about what is required for work. And in our case, it's Teams primarily is required for work. And so our professional conduct rules and rules for engagement on how we interact with each other, that's really firmly in place for Teams. And there's also a broader policy of how we engage with each other in any situation, which will cover all of the different applications. So have a think about where your employees are engaging, or if you're an employee, how you are engaging with your colleagues and your employer. Are there too many things open? Is it something that you need to perhaps cull or streamline? Just so that you can get some nice clear delineation. You don't want to have a really funky communication with a colleague that is also your best friend, or someone that you're having a sexual relationship at work, which is okay, actually doing that on a work-based application, which is not okay. I've seen some pretty hairy communications between two employees of the same organisation, where they were using the Slack application to share some really intimate thoughts with each other on their work machines. So that was embarrassing for everybody. So just keep those nice clear boundaries. Before I get there, also the confidentiality in my business is very, very important. And so if I've got employees talking about private client information whilst they're also talking about social things on Messenger, Facebook chat, then I'm going to have a problem with that. How am I going to be able to access that private chat to be able to take a file note of the fact that, yes, we actually did turn our mind to X, Y, and Z, and so we've satisfied our obligations there? How can the company create a backup of that? So whilst firstly we want to quarantine our work applications from dirty talk, we want to keep our work content on approved applications as well. So that just takes clarity. All right, a quick plug. I've teamed up with some awesome businesses, Inspire Accounting and Employee Matters, that are an HR firm. We've got the business relief package where, for the cost of one JobKeeper payment of $1,500, we are providing businesses with an assessment of their access to stimulus such as JobKeeper, and going through a crash cash flow analysis to try and work out what you need to do and how fast you need to do it. Then you come through to legal, where I work within the boundaries of what accounting has provided to say, okay, we need to cut costs by 20%. This is how we're going to do it, as an example. And finally, you end up with someone from Employee Matters who, acting on a brief from me, will actually give you the documentation that you need to deliver the solution. And all you have to do is join in on a half-an-hour phone call with HR, who will teach you how to use the documents so that you can hit the ground running. So if you've made changes in your business already, there are things you need to do to tidy up loose ends. If you're not sure what the changes are that you can make, then this is going to be your solution too. The business relief package website is going to have all the details that you need. Otherwise, you can shoot us an email on brp@dannykinglegal.com, or give us a call on a Sydney number 9233 5669. Okay, everybody, these are my details. It's been a pleasure working with you today, and I'm going to have a quick scroll through the questions to see whether we can have a bit of a chat in question time. Has anybody got any questions that you'd like to discuss while I quickly scan through here. Now's a good time to block them in because I haven't been keeping up with this. Okay, there's a great question here. When does the workday begin and end? That is a very, very difficult question, even when you've got a workplace with a traditional Bundy clock, because people aren't using Bundy clocks properly these days. So the day starts when the employee is performing work and there is a mutual expectation between the employee and the employer that there will be payment for that work. And that's usually after, if you're in an office context, the person has turned up to work, put their bag down, made a coffee, sat down, turned their computer on and says, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm ready for work now. So that's when they start work, technically. When you're working from home, when do you start work? Well, it's usually when you start actually interacting with work-based tasks. Ideally, and there are some software applications that will do this for you, there will be a data record of when people start interacting with their devices to be able to do work. But that has a huge limitation in that it only helps people who are 100% connected with their device for work. What about cleaners? What about builders? My family's all builders, Catherine, you know, and the time that you start work is when you get to site. And so in a remote context, you can't really build a house remotely. So they're all still turning up and doing that. So that's the start. Then we look at the finish, which is difficult. At the finish, we've got questions about whether a casual drink after work is still included. What if a client's there? What if it's networking? So there will be a different answer depending on the context, and it can be quite a difficult question to answer depending on where you are. And finally, you've got to actually have a record of the start and finish times of breaks during the day, because where you've got an employee covered by an industrial instrument like an award or an enterprise agreement, then sometimes there's an obligation to pay overtime during the break if you don't provide a break within the first 5 hours. Sometimes the overtime will run until such a time as you release that person for a break. And so if someone decides to work through their lunch break, thinking that they're taking one for the team, they're actually doing a lot more harm than good, in that the double time overtime rate might be kicking in by the end of the day, because it's time and a half for the first couple of hours, depending on the instrument, and double time thereafter. So it's a very good question. Okay, I've got an excellent question here about employees having some psychological issues. This is worth an entire webinar, and I've actually spoken on this issue quite a bit. Having an employee with a psychological issue is one of the most difficult things to deal with as an employer. And there are many resources out there to help, but it's very difficult to know what to do. I recommend to complete, well, for the owner of the business, if it's a small business, or any of the managers, including line managers, to complete a mental health first aid training program. I did this for all of my team, and also Employee Matters. I took all of their team along too, and it is the most valuable thing we've ever done. It gave us the knowledge, but also the confidence to deal with someone who's going through crisis, to know how to actually respond to that. And for some people, you would say, and you've got to read the situation, for some people you would say, you need to go and see a GP right now, and for other people you call an ambulance. So there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different tools, and mental health first aid training is the absolute best place to start. But in order to put in some stopgap measures while you're getting your ducks in a row, look into buying a subscription to an employee assistance program. They're a phone-based service where employees call up and they've got access to a psychologist who is able to provide them with a telehealth style appointment that they don't pay for, the employer does. You could also provide, as we do, under a policy that all of our staff don't have to pay for their own psychology appointments with their private psychologists, because I never want a decision between food and help to get in the way of someone getting the emotional support that they need, because I know that I can't do everything for them. And so we've had varying degrees of success with that. It's nowhere near as expensive as even we budgeted for. And I think that the benefits for the couple of people that have taken up that offer have been so enormous. We've reduced our risk for a whole bunch of things, and I just can't recommend it highly enough. Your people, if you're in the right kind of dynamic, and this isn't right for all business, but for us, there's only 15 of us. We've all got a very good relationship of trust and respect with each other. So we trust each other not to take the piss as well. So I appreciate that that won't be a good solution for everybody. Okay, and next question. Are there any requirements around JobKeeper when the employee is making more than the allowance? What are the employee's requirements for hours worked to access JobKeeper? And what are the employer's requirements to commitment to original salary? Okay, there's a lot in this question. I'm actually running a webinar on JobKeeper on Friday of this week. It is for the business support relief package. So I'll put it back on this slide. I'm doing it on a panel with these three people, and we're going to get into a lot of detail on that. There's also 2 podcasts that we've recorded where we talk about what's going on with JobKeeper. So if you want deeper levels of information than what I'm about to provide you, I recommend wherever you get your podcasts, look for Employee Matters. Natasha's the one that's done all of that. And otherwise, join us for the free webinar later this week. But broadly speaking, for your employees, it must be business as usual until you jump through the hoops to make the changes. Just because the employer is receiving JobKeeper doesn't automatically mean that the employee is going to have a change in the workplace. In order to make any changes, there's a process that you have to follow. You've got to consult, you've had 3 days for the employee to think about it and come back to you. Have evidence that you have reflected whatever response the employee gives you, including, hey, this is going to be too much for me, so I can't do it. And then only after that process, make changes such as a reduction in hours to make it so that person is only receiving JobKeeper for this period. The employer is not able to simply make a unilateral decision without agreement from the employee and without this consultation period just because they're getting JobKeeper. There are very strict rules that apply, and you must jump through those hoops, otherwise the penalties are enormous. If you're listening to this and your heart is sinking into your stomach, your stomach is sinking into the floor, it's okay. We can go back and fix things and try and make things better. So jump on, and I think you're a perfect candidate to get the business relief package, because that's going to give you the step guide how to actually execute it. But you know, this is a complex area. People getting salary cuts or treatment of annual leave, all of these things are very heavily regulated by law, case by case basis. There are a range of things to discuss there on a very specific basis. Okay, I think this will be our second last question. Should wellness in the workplace ongoing training be part of employment tracks to ensure digital training is ongoing and not just one-offs. Yes, wellness in the workplace has to be one of the core focuses of management, and that approach. So in the recruitment process, it's in the ongoing documentation, in the induction, it's during employment, including policies and training, and check-ins, and having a proactive management that is engaged. It should, have all workplaces. I just can't recommend mental health first aid training enough. It's having people who are mental health first aid accredited. It's a great course and it's pretty short. And finally, at termination, it is remembering, even though the person is either not a good fit, has done the wrong thing, can't do their job in the way that you thought that they could, or there's a requirement to have to get, have a headcount reduction. In all of those situations, it actually doesn't matter why you're having the conversation. What matters is the person who's receiving it. And the employer's got to be cognizant of the fact that you are making a huge difference in that person's life. And so you've got to put this as the priority going into that discussion, and have some tools ready to deploy during that conversation. So it might be that you've got the card of an outplacement specialist that you can provide and say, look, this person is great at helping people roll on through career trauma to their next gig. Here is a card for a psychologist that this is in the past. Please for you. Here are the details of our employee assistance program. It's there for you if you need it. A lot of the bigger employers will have that in boilerplate in their termination letters or their warnings. And it's there for good reason. It's there to provide additional support to people where you're on notice of there being a heightened risk to their health and safety, and to try and address it. So it's not just one-offs, it's a whole of business plan, and you just got to be targeted and pay attention to it. And finally, interesting question about when employers ask an employee to get help, suggestion, recommendation, it actually can be in a very specific circumstance where the reason that the person is going to perform safely, and it might be necessary to have an independent medical examination and require that to happen before work. You put on a period of leave. It might be personal leave if they've got it accrued. They might be returning from a long-term absence, including on workers' compensation. It might be unpaid leave if the person is volunteering to kind of engage in this and is looking for a bit of a development journey, or it could be paid special leave, because if the person is to work and before allowing that person to come back in, then that person deserves to be paid while the employer jumps through the hoops that they need to satisfy themselves that there is a obligation or a safety appropriate or a safe basis for that person to return to work. So it's the end of the questions there, Sarah.
Okay. I'm not sure. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me, Jenny?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, it was cracking up a little bit at the end, and I don't know. I think that was let's just blame Zoom. Let's blame Zoom on that one. It was cracking up a little bit at the end, but I know we had some queries about what that last question was. So I'm going to just read it for everyone, and I'm happy for. I'm sure that there'll be some follow up on this anyway. So the last question was, when employers ask employees to get help, can it only ever be a suggestion or recommendation? I'm assuming we can't force them. So that was the question that Danny was answering.
And I'll answer it again because I think it's important.
Yeah. I'm sure everyone will want to hear it.
I'm very happy to do it.
And maybe Danny, if you want to maybe like later on, we can actually just do like a summary, typing up just a couple of sentences of a summary of the answers, and then I'll be able to send that to everyone as well. But let's just quickly do the questions, and then everyone will be happy because it is an important one.
Not a problem at all. How's that for sound before I get started? Good. Okay. Thank you for telling me that. So the question is a really important one. Where you've got an employee that the employer is really concerned about their emotional well-being, then it might be necessary to direct them to undergo an independent medical examination and for the employer to insist on that being undertaken prior to that person returning to work. This is not a power that should be used or can be used flippantly. Certain circumstances need to be in place. Traditionally, you would have an independent medical examination where an employee has been on long-term sick leave. They're returning after a pretty significant trauma, or they've put you on notice that they're having some sort of a severe emotional or mental issue that they themselves are concerned about. There's a lot of case law that looks at where a direction to attend an independent medical examination is appropriate or not, and there is such a thing as overstepping the line. So you can't do it in all cases. However, if you do have significant concern about an employee's well-being, I actually think that it's important that the person is cleared to be fit to return to work, because the employer is on notice of a risk, and once on notice, you must take appropriate steps to address it. Yeah.
That's pretty, that's a pretty big issue. It was really, thanks so much, Danny. Like, some of these questions were really fantastic. And I must say, when we started, when you started, I didn't quite think that there would be questions around the psychological issues. But I mean, it's so obvious because for everyone, you know, even from the mildest psychological symptoms, I mean, this has had a big effect on people. And, you know, I mean, I know even from my old days of having my own firm as well, you know, it's when people come to work, it's easy for you to see the person face to face, and, you know, you can kind of gauge if someone's in a good frame of mind, or if they're being out of sorts, if they're not their usual self. But, you know, definitely with everyone remote working, and specifically, you know, when you have so many people that really, let's face it, are really concerned about, will I have a job next month? You know, I've got a mortgage, I've got this, I've got that, you know, whether you're an employee or an employer, there are a lot of people suffering, a lot of stress. So I think Danny's advice is absolutely, you know, very important on that. And I think, you know, it's a real issue that if you're concerned about, you know, mental health, you know, definitely, you know, and you're not sure what to do, well, you know, obviously call Danny, she'll give you great advice. But you know, it's certainly important. And you know, even some of the questions, I would imagine that there have been a few people on today's webinar who would have been very interested around the JobKeeper. I'm happy to Danny will be sending me the information for your link on Friday. Can you do that, Danny? And I'll make sure that we circulate that to all of our attendees. So for anyone who is interested in doing a deep dive into the JobKeeper, definitely we'll send you that link in the next 24 hours, together with some information on Danny. And thanks so much. That was really fantastic, and I really do hope that a lot of you got some information out of that. It was really informative, and Danny, I suspect that you'll be getting quite a few questions following on from this. So, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And obviously, this is our second excellent webinar on that we're presenting on for ISMA on the different social media issues. Oh, I forgot to start my video. Here I am. I'm back. So we are going to be having some other webinars coming up, and maybe we can even compel Danny to do another webinar for us sometime in the future. But please everyone, do make sure that you subscribe to our next webinars. It's another great one on corporate social responsibility and the whole concept of community and how this has really changed workplaces. What we've tried to do is we're trying to bring webinars that don't just talk about the doldrums and the deep, terrible things that are happening right now, but we want to be able to give people a tool or tools of how, what's happening on social media, because everyone is on social media, and how you can actually look at utilising positive measures and positive tips that are being given. So we've heard from Tim on brand strategies, Danny with these amazing employment tips, and on the 22nd of May we'll be hearing from corporate university law lecturer Grace Borsellino on corporate social responsibilities, and we'll have other excellent webinars, and I'll be sending everyone that link. So thank you so much. That was really brilliant, Jenny. Thank you. It was great.
Thanks, everyone. Good
All right. Well, that'll be the end of that, and I hope everyone has a lovely day. I'm actually in Florida at the moment, so it's quite late here. We're in lockdown, definitely in Florida. But have a wonderful day, everyone, and we hope to see you very, very soon.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.